Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go frame by frame. I watched the cinematic and I just feel like recording a YouTube video all of a sudden. So the cinematic opens with the signature swirling brown smoke that Brimstone uses, right? So we know that's Brimstone's utility. As I think from the silhouettes we can make out, Reyna rays, and I'm assuming this person is Phoenix, is shooting through the smoke. Yeah, I think that's the white jacket. Yeah, pretty sure that's Phoenix. They're shooting through the smoke towards the retreating members of the Omega roster. From like all of these guys are from Omega Earth, right? And we can see that Chamber is covering for his allies, but is now gravely wounded. We can also see a cracked pair of glasses, and this will come later in the video. So we see Viper realizes that and goes to rescue him, but Brimstone holds her back and she shoots her Vandal in frustration and desperation, and we see an aircraft above. Now, this is pretty interesting because this is the cinematic for Why We Fight, the 5-year anniversary cinematic that they released like a while ago. And it begins with boom, a brimstone smoke, an exact same one. We see that Brimstone is looking at his iPad and probably summoned the smoke as he helps Reyes carry out Killjoy, who seems to be gravely wounded as well. Through this, we see shots firing behind him, so he's trying to help Reyes and Killjoy out of there as Reyna goes into the smoke and fires back at the enemies. So here, these guys, as you can see, did you catch that? Bullets being fired at the same aircraft. Again, another shot as the aircraft goes into the air, extracts all of the Alpha roster. So, this Why We Fight cinematic is actually from the perspective of the Alpha Valorant roster from Alpha Earth. And the Toxic cinematic, that can only mean, is from the perspective of Omega Earth. Brimstone rushing to help Reyes carry Killjoy to the aircraft, Arena going into the smoke, giving them some cover fire, shots being fired at the aircraft. Okay, that's all just like a coincidence, right? People shoot bullets at each other. That's what's happened. But what I like to think is that it's not a coincidence. I like it when we have different cinematics that are trying to represent or paint the same situation, but from different perspectives. I think it's pretty cool. We can see that Chamber is breathing, which means that he is alive, but his condition is critical. Another detail is that all of the beds with the bodies covered have these panels over them. We can see another panel over here as well, but Chamber doesn't have it yet. So we can likely infer that this is information about the body or the condition of the deceased. There is someone inside of the glass construct, a lot of crystallizations on their body. As Viper touches the glass, uh, kind of almost saying goodbye. We can see that Viper is looking sharply at Brimstone. Her jaw completely clenched. You can see that her lower lip is moving a bit forward compared to her upper lip, emphasizing that she's clenching her jaw, probably in anger. And she walks through him. This kind of indicates that she might be mad at him, which will again be relevant later on. And we see that it's actually Sage. So a lot of beds occupying deceased individuals, and then we have Sage seeming to be unconscious. You can say that they're probably using Sage in order to like help all of the other agents or Chamber, but I'm pretty sure she would be more useful if she were conscious. And another interesting detail is that Sage has all of these crystallizations over her body. And where else do you see this? You see this when Sage ults. So, and there are a lot of pipes running through her body into the glass chamber. So, this suggests that Sage is also in a very critical condition and they're using her own powers to somehow keep her alive. Or at least that's what I think is happening. Here we can see two children playing outside, and both of them having bionic arms. So we have one right bionic hand over here, and then we have another one over here. Breach seems to be in his countryside house base, which makes sense because of his criminal past, which I'm assuming that his part of the backstory in Alpha and Omega Earth are the same. That's why he isn't in like an apartment surrounded by people. Another kid seems to be getting his legs repaired and tinkered by Breach, who eventually pulls him to come out and play as well. These kids might be family, or maybe they're just kids that needed bionic limbs, and Breach is there to help, because he's an expert at that. Another detail is that we can see a drum set on the left over here, which is a good detail because we know through in game descriptions and items that Breach is actually a drummer. So you can also take a look at his music taste from his Spotify playlist. Yoru rift walks and jumps into an actively falling building, saving three people. And this is really fast, which also goes on to show how quickly he's working. Like I absolutely love this detail, by the way. He rift walks going into the portal, taking them out. Like this is a seamless transition. He's into the falling building, and then all of a sudden he's on ground. He puts all of the people on the ground because we can see that he's holding all of the people over here, right? Rift walks onto the ground and then back into the air, teleports again, grabs another person, and is ready to escape. But now this is really good, by the way. So we can see that there is another person behind, trapped under like a lot of rebar, like a lot of fallen concrete and bits of the building, probably related to the child with braids over here. And this is so heartbreaking. Yoru is a character like all duelists, like Phoenix, like Jet. All of them are extremely cocky, really arrogant, really confident. But seeing Yoru like this, so torn apart between two different decisions he'd like to make, he wants to save everyone, right? But he's so conflicted, he's so confused, and you can see the desperation in his eyes. Look at him. Hey, I've never seen him this vulnerable before. He looks at her, but he knows he can't save her, so he rift walks out after spending a solid 3 to 4 seconds and looks back as the spike explodes and takes all of the radianite with it. There's nothing he can do about it. So now, as agents, uh, responsible for the security and protection of their people and like their version of the earth, it's their one of their main objectives to well diffuse the spike, right? We can see the huge area of the spike already looming above him, right? Yoru, his figure seeming so small amidst the extremely large radius. It's You can also see it like as kind of like a huge challenge or difficulty he's dealing with right now while he is alone against this big challenge. All he has is himself. And apart from like the symbolism, we can see that the spike is already detonated, right? As he's trying to rescue everyone. Again, we see the huge radius of the spike already consuming and teleporting everything to the other reality, to the people who planted the spike, their reality, right? So now, why wouldn't you just diffuse the spike? Like, that makes sense, right? Like, if you diffuse the spike, then it makes sense that you would save a lot more people. What? The spike has already exploded. So, if the spike has already detonated, why is Yoru here so late, right? And don't get me wrong here, I'm not blaming Yoru in any way, but usually if something happens, if there is activity from like agents from another reality, all of the cinematics we have seen that the response is almost immediate. But this time around, it looks like that Yoru wasn't fast enough. Maybe because it was he got the orders late. Maybe because they couldn't come up with the correct approach or like the correct strategy to approach the situation. Sounds like maybe a leadership problem. The entire scene is dominated by a very heavy blue, and we can see that blue is kind of Yoru's entire color palette for like his attire and his aesthetic, which, and then we can see that the entire tragedy is happening at night. So, and then all of the marks on him because of him rift walking, which can also be a sign of exertion or maybe just using his abilities. But it's night, heavy blue color. Yuru also has a blue color palette, and this tragedy is happening at night, and his name is Yoru, which also means night. So, like Riot is really rubbing the salt on the wounds here, by the way. Like, I don't appreciate that against Yoru. Speaking of color schemes, we can see that this particular scene is really bluish gray, which obviously matches Sova's attire, which sets up the scene for his part of the confrontation. A Sova from an unknown dimension seemed to have stabbed him in his right eye as he stands over him, half smirking, with an eye patch on his right eye as well. You can see him smirking over here. And him smirking, or almost looking down on him, seems to be an important detail because Foreign Sova, as I'll call this guy Foreign Sova, and this person Omega Sova. So as we see that Foreign Sova has injured Omega Sova in his right eye. Let's keep the right eye thing in mind here. So he cleans his blade as Sova rides in agony. Another thing to observe here as Foreign Sova, right? Look at his eye patch. Again, you can count the polygons, you can clearly see them. The character models aren't extremely detailed. Look at the ears over here. When you zoom in, you realize that, okay, now there is a side edge, now this part is flat, now there is a indentation inside, and you can literally see the edges of the ears. But why does it look so good? It looks good because they pay so much attention towards shading and trying to give the illusion of shadow and light, which turns out really, really beautiful. Agents from different realities are supposed to be extremely valuable resources against these incursions from alternate dimensions trying to steal their radianite, right? And trying to harm the people in their world. So, killing an agent, someone who is very skilled, is probably like insanely valuable for their cause, right? But still, he doesn't do it. He doesn't kill Soa, and he leaves him. And we see him standing next to Sage with a new mechanical eye. Looking at this scene, this is something that I like a lot, by the way. We can see that this circular opening kind of reminds me of Sova Ult, and these craters on the Earth are probably shock darts that Sova used. So this is like a very cool trick where they're using in-game mechanics draw focus towards these two actors. So here we can see that all of the trees have a bluish or orangish and reddish colors on them, which indicates that these trees are singed, right? They're burnt and they were recently damaged. I think that this is indicative of the uh, Omega Sova and his squad being ambushed by Foreign Sova, and the encounter was pretty quick. Uh, Omega Sova was probably caught off guard by them. Uh, no one else is attacking him, so it indicates that most of these soldiers, as we can see, probably belong to Omega Sova's squad, and everyone is neutralized. All right, so what's the point of all of this? I think all of these things point towards the failure of the Omega roster under Brim's leadership. We can see the scene switches from Breach, Yoru, and Sova all facing towards, as I assume, Chamber's bed, but the scene immediately switches towards Brimstone and his statue. So that can also show that they are looking with disgust or with disdain towards Brimstone. The next scene shows Viper waking up from her nightmare and grabbing her gas mask to regain herself. I've always seen Viper wear a gas mask even when she isn't in her toxic clouds, which leads me to believe that she probably finds some comfort in inhaling it or using it. At the same time, we can see Chamber comfort her as she wakes up from her nightmare. But as she lowers her mask, Chamber isn't there anymore. So I think that the clarity and the comfort she gets from using her mask is related or equivalent to Chamber and how she felt towards him. In the Omega reality or on Omega Earth, they probably had like a really fulfilling relationship where Chamber meant a lot to her. Now, this particular frame, I kind of love. So Viper keeps Chambers' cracked glasses with her, which is kind of cute and sad at the same time. The broken glasses and Viper uh, kind of indicate what happened with Viper, right? This scene tells her story, and now we have two separate objects. This hourglass in the background and Brimstone's statue in the foreground. So now, what does an hourglass represent? It represents the passage of time or time running out. So Viper looking up at Brimstone's statue and Brimstone's time may be running out, which kind of checks out, by the way. So you can see like Viper works out, right? So you can see that she has bolder shoulders, but again, you can see the polygons, right? You can see that the polygons are clearly highlighted. But the way they work with their models and the way they texture them is so good. In this particular frame, we see that Viper is hunched, looking up at Brimstone, but the scene changes, and now Brimstone is hunched, looking up at Viper. So this really subtly represents a power dynamic shift. Brimstone's judgment happens in front of a really big K, and that K looks really familiar. But my suspicions were actually not unfounded. We see, obviously, the Viper wrapping around Brimstone's statue is supposed to be a representation of Viper eventually taking control and dethroning Brimstone. But more interestingly, the elaborate K patch on Brimstone. That is the symbol of kingdom. Kingdom is an organization that is responsible for, I think, around three-fourths of the world's power, which goes on to indicate that in any reality, kingdom is a company that has most of the radianite reserves and does a lot of research or business or other activities related to them. We can see Viper snatching that away. So Brim is wearing a patch with the kingdom sigil, right? That uh, that portrays him as the leader of these people, of all of these agents. And a giant statue of him shows his place as a significant figure in the Omega roster. But if Brimstone is wearing a kingdom sigil, then doesn't that mean that Valorant is a daughter organization of Kingdom? I'm pretty sure that isn't the case though. We know that on each version of Earth, Valorant exists as an independent organization. If all cinematics are released in chronological order, then Valorant as an organization already exists in Omega. So why not don a sigil that represents Valorant? The organization is globally celebrated through Omega, right? This leads me to believe, and this is a considerable leap in logic. I don't know if I'm right here, but maybe it's because Valorant as an organization doesn't exist yet. And maybe the Omega Valorant organization was found under the leadership of Viper. So that would mean that this entire cinematic is a story of the past, and that would make sense because that gives Omega Valorant a fighting chance, given that they have yet to recruit more agents and they have a shot at saving their planet from collapse. Sage seems to be in a critical condition, but maybe they can recover from this. Maybe the fight isn't over yet. The huge K here can also be seen as symbolism as to the responsibilities and expectations that a big company like Kingdom has from Brimstone was a bit too much to bear. But I think this is probably just like a headcanon. But what I think is that Yoru isn't really good at portraying his emotions. So he is looking down at him, at Brimstone, but he expresses his disdain by, maintaining distance. Sova, Breach, and Viper are like in his face, right? But Yoru is kind of in the background, like he isn't coming close to him. They infiltrate this facility. Now, there is a possibility that this is a reserve for Radianite, but this can also be a vacation home. Like, I don't really know for sure. There is a possibility, though. We could argue that these boxes contain Radianite, but they're probably just windows. It doesn't seem like a place that would contain Radianite, right? So I think it's just a ambush or a declaration of war, if you will. We can see Omega Sova surveilling this place before the attack. And now another detail. Remember the right eye thing I was talking about? Look at that. Alpha Sova's right eye is blue, which means that it seems to be a mechanical eye. It's not his real eye, right? And now, when Sova has to attack, he does not aim for the head, but more specifically, his right eye, even though it's mechanical. So now this goes on to show that I think all Sovas have some kind of a rivalry where they take each other's right eye. Breach initiates, Viper enters, and arts. We see that they are working by separating all of the people, so it's easy to pick them off. So Viper takes off Raze away from Killjoy. We can see Yoru distracts Reina and Sova takes her out. And there, again, the arrow is embedded in his eye, not to mortally wound him. And Omega Sova walks up to him, grabs the arrow, and removes it, standing over Alpha Sova. So again, I think this right eye thing is supposed to be a rivalry. So we don't really know what happens to Raze next, but now we have an encounter between Brimstone and Viper. Obviously, Brimstone isn't really prepared to fight her, but he does his best. So obviously, Omega Viper hates Brimstone now, right? So whenever she sees Brimstone, she sees red. So she's probably traumatized by it. She looks at Brimstone and also sees Chamber and probably unconsciously convinces herself that all Brimstones are to blame and that all Brimstones are her enemy in order to justify her fighting against them. So now, again, the justification. So no one really talks about what kind of a mental burden it must be that you're hanging out with, let's say, Raze and Killjoy, right? So Viper probably loved Raze and Killjoy a lot. They were part of her Omega roster at Kingdom, but then they had to die. But now you have to invade other worlds and kill or possibly harm their agents that look exactly like your loved ones. Like, no one really talks about this. So that's the reason I wanted to point out that Viper probably internally convinces herself that every brimstone is equally bad, and this is probably like a representation of it. Every time she sees a brimstone, she is always going to remember what happened to her chamber. And it's because of that she completely abandons all possible mercy that she might have shown. Extremely brutal, right? As the adrenaline wears off, the emotions on her face seem to be a mix of fear and a hint of surprise at her own actions. But she collects herself, and we can see that the emotions are replaced by a sense of certainty and determination. This is my first ever YouTube video, so if you've watched this far, uh, it means a lot. Let me know what you think about it. Did it suck or did it bang? But Thank you for watching.